You're going to want to lock your windows after this. Like all the windows after this. You will never probably open your window again after watching this docuseries. I'm reviewing Night Stalker, The Hunt for a Serial Killer. Hey Twisted people, it's your Twisted Woman here, Chauncey K. Robinson, and I am doing a review. I can't really call it spoiler free because it's a historical docu-series, right? Like it's stuff that if you didn't know about it, maybe it's kind of new to you in terms of the details, but overall, it's kind of common knowledge. But it's an overall, overarching review of the Netflix docu-series Night Stalker, The Hunt for a Serial Killer. The Netflix limited docu-series Night Stalker, The Hunt for a Serial Killer tells the true story of how one of the most notorious serial killers in American history was hunted down and brought to justice. This docu-series focuses in on Richard Ramirez, one of the most infamous serial killers in U.S. history, and particularly California, even more specifically Los Angeles history, and the trail of terror that he basically imposed on men, women, and children from pretty much the late 1970s through a good chunk of the 80s. And what this series does is it basically shows you from the vantage point of the police officers, mainly two detectives, and how they went about solving the case. I think this is a film that if you are into serial killer documentaries or true crime documentaries that don't glorify or try to somehow dissect the killer themselves, but more so what happened on the other end, how the police officers, how maybe the victims and others brought the killer to justice, then this is going to be for you. I know that in some cases we have gotten docu-series and documentaries in the past that I honestly think somewhat glorify the killers. You know, there's like tapes of like Ted Bundy and things like that. Just kind of like listening to mad men and women talk about why they're killers and things. And I personally, I will say I don't find that as fascinating as the puzzle work, the police work, and the investigation that goes into hunting the killers down, or the ramifications brought on in society from this killer's actions. I find that more interesting. Now, I say that as somewhat of my bias coming into this as to why I enjoyed this a bit more than other documentaries that at times have put a lot of focus on the killer themselves and their personal lives and their inner thoughts and things like that, which I think in some cases on a psychological level can be interesting, but I find it more interesting to look at it from the viewpoint of those on the other end trying to solve a case. So if you are opposite of me in that regard, you may not find this as interesting because in the case of Richard Ramirez, his words don't come in a lot in this film. This is not one of those docuseries where you're going to get quotes and videotapes and archive footage of interviews from the killer in particular. They are kind of the mechanism, the catalyst of these other people's stories, these police officers, the detectives, some of the victims. That's what you're going to get. The killer, Richard Ramirez, in this particular case, kind of plays in the backdrop, the boogeyman, so to speak, up until probably the final episode of the series where he comes into more prominence because of, talking about how they caught him and stuff like that. But even then, it's still very much focused on the people affected, the city affected, the state affected, and how that capture affected those people, which I think can make for a more interesting story to a certain degree. So I appreciated that about this series. The docu-series has a cool, slick, late 70s, 1980s aesthetic to it with the way they tell the stories and the archive footage from what was going on during that time with the politicians and the city and how the lives of the people were. So it has a very dominant, effective look to it that probably will draw you in if you're an 80s kind of lover of things. I don't know if that's weird to say since it's talking about a serial killer, but it very much has a style to it when it comes to this docuseries. Now, what you may not be used to when it comes to a series of this nature are the graphic murder scenes. which are very graphic. I was kind of expecting that things would be alluded to, or maybe you'd see like a bloody hand or something like that. No, they are actually showing the pictures of the victims after they are assaulted and or killed, and the scene itself. And so you may think that that crosses something of a line. You may think it goes a bit too far and it's a bit too in your face, because maybe you might be someone who's interested in the details and the history, but you don't necessarily want to look at dead bodies necessarily, or really graphic scenes of what this, for lack of a better word, monster did to these victims. If that is something that you think may be a bit much, then this may not be for you. Now, for me, I will say that it caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting them to be so open about showing the actual case files, more so the photographs of the victims, like still in their beds and their bodies and stuff. I was like, whoa, that's a lot. With that said, I think it made sense. It was justified. I don't think it was like gimmicky. I don't think it was exploitative. And because of the fact that the ones that they did show were people whose family members they interviewed, that makes me feel that they got permission to do that necessarily. And it wasn't just, we're just going to be very graphic and show you these pictures that are very disturbing. If you're looking for something that maybe has not been explored before, or a little bit on a deeper level of what the psyche of the killer was, or even on a deeper level of what was going on in the departments aside from some power plays, you may feel like this is covered ground. The main trigger warning in this documentary that you will see are the graphic murder scenes. They are graphic. They do not, aside from maybe covering a few eyes here and there, you see everything. The other trigger warning is that sexual assault and abuse are alluded to throughout the docuseries. My final grade for Night Stalker, The Hunt for a Serial Killer, is a B. This is a creepy series. It's creepy. And it's not like they had to necessarily like pulling blood from a stone and making it creepy. It wasn't that hard, because Richard Ramirez is a very creepy character, or was a creepy character. I think if nothing else, I hope will come from watching this is that maybe certain pop culture, mainstream TV shows, American Horror Story, cough, will stop glorifying this character so much, because I think it's done a bit too much. But I don't think Richard Ramirez is the only one that's been glorified. There's been a few that have been glorified throughout our history in a very weird way. And I hope by maybe seeing some of what this serial killer did, that perhaps that would stop. Okay, Twisted people, that is my review of Night Stalker, The Hunt for a Serial Killer. Let me know your thoughts down below. Please comment. And also be sure to subscribe so that you are the first to know when I post my videos. Thanks for watching. Let's get creepy together.